What secrets help soldiers keep their sanity during the most terrifying moments of war? Their methods of coping with fear were as important for survival as accurate shooting or the ability to dig in. In these inhuman conditions, unique psychological techniques were developed that transformed paralyzing terror into manageable tension. Soldiers learned not to get rid of fear completely, but to channel it in the right direction, turning it into an ally. Watch the video to the end to find out how a simple playing card could become a powerful weapon against panic, and why some fighters deliberately kept a photograph of the enemy in their pocket. What if I told you that most soldiers had their own secret rituals? Before every battle, every patrol, or every raid, soldiers performed the same actions in a strictly defined sequence. These rituals had nothing to do with superstition. They were a scientifically proven way to prepare the mind for extreme situations. British paratroopers always checked their equipment in the same order. First the main parachute, then the reserve, then their weapons. American fighter pilots touched certain parts of the plane in a set sequence before takeoff. Soviet snipers always cleaned their rifle optics with a special movement from left to right. These actions created the illusion of control over the situation. When everything around them was unpredictable and chaotic, the strict sequence of familiar movements became an island of stability. The brain received a signal. If I can control these little things, then I am ready for more. The physical activity of the ritual helped to release the accumulated tension. Checking ammunition, loading weapons, adjusting straps. All this required concentration on specific actions. Hands were busy with useful work, rather than trembling with fear. Rituals also served as a psychological anchor. They linked the present moment to previous successful operations. If a soldier survived by performing this sequence last time, then it works. This created a sense of continuity and reliability. Many fighters added personal elements to their rituals. Some would read a letter from their wife. Others would touch a medallion or cross. These items became talismans not because of their mystical properties, but because they were associated with home and peaceful life. Commanders encouraged such rituals, understanding their importance for morale. Experienced sergeants themselves demonstrated examples of proper preparation to their subordinates. They knew that a soldier who spent time on a ritual was psychologically more prepared for battle than one who simply waited for orders. It is interesting to see how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world. Where are you from? Do you agree that rituals can really help to cope with fear? Want to know the secret that saved thousands of lives? When shells were exploding and bullets were whizzing around, many soldiers instinctively began to breathe rapidly and shallowly. This led to hyperventilation, dizziness, and loss of control. Experienced fighters knew that proper breathing was the first line of defense against panic. The basic technique was simple and effective. 4 counts on the inhale through the nose, a 2-count pause, 4 counts on the exhale through the mouth. This rhythm slowed the heart rate and calmed the nervous system. Most importantly, it could be done in any conditions, even while lying in a crater under artillery fire. American Marines used a combat breathing technique. They took a deep breath, imagining how the air filled not only their lungs, but also the muscles of their arms holding the rifle. As they exhaled, they mentally exhaled their fear and tension, leaving only a calm readiness for action. British RAF pilots developed their own system. Before approaching their target, they took a series of short, sharp breaths, followed by one long exhalation. This saturated the brain with oxygen and helped them maintain clarity of thought at the critical moment of attack or when evading enemy fighters. Snipers used the breathing between shots technique. They took 3 deep breaths in and out, then held their breath on a natural exhale and fired a shot. This method not only calmed them down, but also improved their shooting accuracy. Many soldiers combined breathing techniques with simple mantras. These could be words of prayer, a line from a song, or simply counting. Repeating familiar words in rhythm with their breathing created an additional calming effect and prevented their thoughts from wandering. Group breathing techniques were especially important in cramped shelters. When several soldiers sat in the same dugout under fire, they unconsciously synchronized their breathing. Experienced sergeants consciously set a slow, deep rhythm, which the others picked up. Regimental medical battalion doctors noted that soldiers who mastered breathing techniques were less likely to suffer from nervous breakdowns. Proper breathing was a natural tranquilizer that was always at hand and had no side effects. This knowledge was passed down from veterans to recruits as part of an unwritten code of survival. Old soldiers understood that teaching a young soldier to breathe correctly under fire meant increasing his chances of returning home alive. What do you think? Can such a simple technique really help modern people in stressful situations? I discovered this by accident in the memoirs of a veteran. Most soldiers carried photographs of loved ones, letters from their wives, or religious symbols. But some fighters used the opposite tactic. They deliberately kept an image or object associated with the enemy with them. This strange practice had a deep psychological meaning. German soldiers sometimes carried photographs of Soviet T-34 tanks that they had destroyed or seen destroyed. American infantrymen might keep the shell casing from a German shell that had exploded nearby but caused no harm. Soviet soldiers collected badges from the German uniforms of enemies they had killed. The logic was simple and effective. Instead of fearing an abstract, omnipotent enemy, soldiers had tangible proof of his vulnerability. A photograph of a destroyed tank said, "This machine can be destroyed." A shell casing whispered, "This explosion did not kill me." Such objects transformed the enemy from a mythical monster into an ordinary person who could also make mistakes, miss, and die. When fear became concrete, it was easier to fight. Soldiers knew what exactly frightened them and had proof that this fear could be overcome. Some fighters went even further and studied the enemy's captured equipment. They took apart captured machine guns, studied the design of grenades, and tried on helmets. Knowing how the enemy's weapons worked stripped them of their mystical aura of invincibility. This technique worked especially well against specific phobias. Pilots who were afraid of anti-aircraft fire studied photographs of anti-aircraft guns and how they worked. Tankers who were terrified of bazookas carefully examined, captured examples of this weapon. Modern psychologists call this exposure therapy. Gradual, controlled exposure to the source of fear reduces anxiety. Soldiers intuitively used this method long before it was scientifically proven. The most determined fighters organized fear sessions for themselves. They consciously imagined the most terrible battle scenarios, mentally rehearsing their actions in critical situations. Such psychological rehearsals prepared them for real trials. It was important to find a balance between healthy study of the enemy and unhealthy obsession. The object had to remind them of the danger they had overcome, not become a source of new fears. Experienced soldiers intuitively sense this line. Are you ready to learn the truth about how soldiers program themselves for survival? Many fighters, without realizing it, used an advanced psychological technique that modern athletes call visualization. They mentally replayed the upcoming battle, imagining their every move and possible scenarios. Experienced machine gunners closed their eyes before battle and imagined how they would fire. They mentally saw the battlefield, selected targets, and imagined the recoil of the weapon and the sound of gunfire. When the real battle began, their hands already remembered the correct movements. Fighter pilots spent hours mentally rehearsing aerial maneuvers. They imagined how they would attack enemy bombers, how they would evade pursuit, how they would land a damaged aircraft. This practice significantly increased their chances of survival. Snipers used mental rehearsal to practice difficult shots. They studied the terrain, chose a position, and mentally fired a shot, taking into account the wind, distance, and movement of the target. In real combat, their muscles already knew what to do. The technique included not only actions, but also emotions. Soldiers imagined how they would feel under fire, how they would react to a comrade's injury, how they would behave during a retreat. They experienced stressful situations in advance in a safe environment. Many fighters added planning elements to their mental rehearsals. They imagined not only the ideal course of events, but also various complications. What to do if a weapon jams, how to act if the commander is wounded, where to retreat if the position becomes untenable. Group mental rehearsals were conducted before complex operations. The commander described the plan of action, and the fighters mentally played out their roles in the overall plan. This increased the coordination of the unit and reduced the likelihood of mistakes. Modern research confirms the effectiveness of this method. The brain does not always distinguish between real and imagined events, so mental training really improves physical skills and psychological readiness for stressful situations. Do you think this technique could help soldiers cope better with unexpected situations? Under conditions of constant stress, a soldier might not notice signs of nervous exhaustion or an impending breakdown. Therefore, most units had an informal system of mutual psychological control. Soldiers watched each other as closely as they watched the enemy. The system worked on the principle of combat pairs. Two soldiers became responsible for each other not only in battle, but also in everyday life. They monitored how their partner ate, slept, and reacted to stressful situations. Any changes in behavior were immediately discussed. The signs of an impending nervous breakdown were well known. A soldier would start talking too much or too little, lose his appetite, or suffer from insomnia. His movements would become jerky and nervous, or conversely, slow and apathetic. An experienced partner would notice these symptoms before the soldier himself. The intervention was delicate but persistent. The partner did not argue or lecture. He simply began to talk more with his comrade, distracting him with conversations about home, offering to share food or guard duty with him. The main task was to prevent the person from withdrawing into himself. Special attention was paid to newcomers, who were most vulnerable to psychological trauma. Each recruit was assigned an experienced soldier who became not only a mentor in military affairs, but also a psychological support. This uncle taught not only how to shoot and dig trenches, but also how to cope with fear. The system also included group control. If several people noticed strange behavior in a comrade, they reported it to the commander or medic. Early diagnosis of nervous disorders made it possible to prevent serious breakdowns and maintain the combat capability of the unit. An important part was the technique of emotional release. Soldiers learned to recognize when a comrade's tension reached a critical point. In this case, they deliberately provoked him to vent his emotions. They offered to fight, argue, or shout. Controlled release of aggression prevented uncontrolled breakdowns. This system of informal psychological control saved thousands of soldiers from nervous breakdowns and suicides. It proved that in extreme conditions, people do not survive alone, but only by supporting each other. Fear divided in half became twice as weak. What if I showed you a psychological technique used by snipers? One of the most effective techniques for combating fear was consciously shifting attention from the source of danger to a specific task. Instead of thinking about what might happen, soldiers focused on what needed to be done right now. Machine gunners counted the rounds in their belt, mentally planned the order in which to hit targets, and monitored the temperature of the barrel. These technical details required concentration and left no room for panic. Fear receded when the brain was busy solving specific tasks. Radio operators concentrated on the quality of communication, frequency tuning, and recording messages. Medics checked the contents of their medical kits and reviewed first aid procedures. Everyone found elements in their duties that required their full attention. The technique worked on the principle of substitution. The human brain cannot focus on several complex tasks at once. When attention was completely absorbed by technical details, there was simply no room left for fear. Emotions faded into the background. This worked especially well with visual tasks. Observers and fire correctors studied the terrain through binoculars, memorized landmarks, and noted changes in the enemy's position. Their eyes and brains were busy processing a huge amount of information. Commanders deliberately loaded their subordinates with additional tasks while waiting for battle. They knew that an idle mind is the best friend of fear. Therefore, soldiers were constantly checking, cleaning, and studying something. Busy hands and brains did not allow the imagination to paint terrible pictures. The technique of shifting attention was especially helpful in situations of anticipation. When soldiers knew that combat was about to begin, but the exact time was unknown, it was precisely at these moments that fear reached its peak. Focusing on preparatory actions helped them get through this difficult time. Modern psychology confirms the effectiveness of this method. Cognitive switching techniques are widely used to treat anxiety disorders and phobias. Soldiers in World War II intuitively discovered what science only substantiated decades later. Do you think this technique can be used to combat fears in everyday life? In the most dire situations, when death was near, soldiers found reasons to joke. This was not a manifestation of cynicism or indifference. It was a conscious, defensive reaction of the psyche. Black humor became one of the most powerful tools for combating fear and despair. Soldiers' jokes and stories served several purposes at once. They reduced tension at critical moments, created an illusion of normality, and helped release pent-up emotions in a safe way. Laughter was a natural antidepressant that was always at hand. Jokes about death and danger were especially popular. Soldiers came up with funny nicknames for enemy weapons, made up comical stories about failed operations, and parodied orders from the command. Ridiculing the threat made it less scary and more manageable. Collective laughter created a special atmosphere of unity. When the whole group laughed at the same joke, it emphasized their shared experiences and mutual support. People who could laugh together felt less alone in the face of danger. Many units had their own comedians, soldiers who specialized in boosting morale through humor. These people intuitively understood when the group needed a break and always knew the right joke or story. They were valued no less than good marksmen. Black humor was a kind of code, understood only by those who had gone through similar trials. It created a special brotherhood based on a shared understanding of the absurdity and cruelty of war. The ability to laugh at horror was a sign of psychological maturity and strength. When fear paralyzed the muscles and adrenaline was skyrocketing, physical exercise became a way to regain control over one's own body. Experienced soldiers knew that targeted physical activity helped to cope with excess stress hormones and restore normal body function. The simplest exercises were those involving muscle contraction and relaxation. Soldiers would clench their fists with all their might for 10 seconds, then relax them sharply. They did the same with the muscles of their arms, legs, and back. This helped relieve muscle tension and reduce tremors. Squats and push-ups were used to release excess energy. When a soldier felt like he was about to explode from tension, he could do a few dozen squats or push-ups right in the trench. Physical fatigue helped burn off excess adrenaline and restore emotional balance. Isometric exercises, which could be performed discreetly, were especially popular. Soldiers could tense their abdominal muscles, squeeze their buttocks, or press their palms against each other. These exercises did not require movement and were invisible to those around them, but they effectively relieved tension. Some units held short training sessions before operations. 10 minutes of physical exercise helped the fighters relieve pre-start tension and tune in to the task ahead. This was especially important for paratroopers and saboteurs. Breathing exercises were often combined with physical exercises. Soldiers took deep breaths while tensing their muscles and exhaled while relaxing. This combination had the maximum calming effect and helped them quickly regain control of their emotions. Walking and marching were also used as therapy. The rhythmic movements of walking calmed the nervous system and helped to organize thoughts. Many soldiers noted that after a long march, they felt calmer and more balanced. It was important not to overdo the workload. The goal of the exercises was not to develop strength, but to manage stress. Overtraining could lead to additional exhaustion of the body, which was already working at its limit. Commanders encouraged such activity, understanding its benefits for morale. Soldiers who could control their bodies were better able to control their emotions. Physical discipline had a direct impact on psychological stability. Group exercises created an additional effect of team cohesion. When the entire unit performed the same movements, it emphasized unity and mutual support. Collective physical activity strengthened combat brotherhood. These simple physical techniques were accessible to every soldier in any conditions. They did not require special equipment or training, but could radically change a soldier's psychological state. The ability to control one's body was the first step toward controlling one's fears. One of the most powerful ways to maintain mental health was to stay connected to civilian life. Letters home served not only as a means of communication, but also as an important psychotherapeutic tool. They served as a reminder of what was worth living for and gave hope for a return to normality. The process of writing a letter was therapeutic in itself. Soldiers had to formulate their thoughts and feelings and structure them into a coherent narrative. This helped them to organize their inner chaos and better understand their own experiences. Many soldiers wrote letters even when they did not know whether they would reach their recipients. The very fact of addressing their loved ones was reassuring and gave them a sense of connection to home. Some soldiers wrote letters every day, turning it into a ritual of psychological relief. In their letters, soldiers tried to remain optimistic, even when they were feeling down. This forced them to look for positive moments in their surroundings. The need to cheer up their loved ones forced the authors themselves to look at life more optimistically. Receiving letters from home was no less important than sending them. News about the daily life of the family, about problems that seem so important in peacetime, helped soldiers maintain a connection with the normal human world. The photographs enclosed in the letters became especially valuable. They served as a visual reminder that there was a world without war, where people smiled and enjoyed life. Many soldiers carried these photographs with them at all times. Some soldiers kept diaries in the form of letters that they planned to send after the war. This allowed them to describe their experiences honestly, without censoring their own emotions. Such records helped them process traumatic events. At critical moments, when all rational methods of coping with fear were exhausted, soldiers turned to faith. Religious beliefs and spiritual practices became the last line of psychological defense. Faith provided what no technique could: absolute certainty that death was not the end. Prayer was the most common form of spiritual support. It required no special conditions or objects, only faith and knowledge of the text. Repeating words familiar from childhood was calming and created a sense of protection from higher powers. Many soldiers wore religious symbols: crosses, medallions, amulets. These items served as material anchors of faith. Touching a cross or Star of David reminded them of divine protection and helped them focus on spiritual values. Collective religious services were of particular importance. When several soldiers gathered for communal prayer, it created a powerful atmosphere of spiritual unity. Shared faith united people more strongly than shared fears divided them. Military chaplains served not only as spiritual mentors but also as psychologists. They listened to confessions, gave advice, and provided support in difficult moments. For many soldiers, talking to a chaplain was the only opportunity to speak openly about their fears and doubts. Faith helped them find meaning in their suffering. Soldiers who believed that their sacrifices served a higher purpose found it easier to endure the hardships of war. A religious worldview transformed war from a senseless slaughter into a spiritual test or sacred mission. Pre-battle rituals had deep psychological significance. The sign of the cross, reading psalms, kissing icons, all of this created a sense of divine blessing. Soldiers went into battle not alone, but under the protection of higher powers. Post-mortem rituals were also important for the living. Proper burial of comrades, reading prayers for the deceased, sending letters to their families. All this helped soldiers cope with the grief of loss and maintain their faith in the justice of the world. Some soldiers found solace in fatalism. Belief in predestination freed them from the agonizing feeling of responsibility for every decision. If everything is in God's hands, then one can act boldly, without paralyzing oneself with fear of the consequences. Spiritual support was not always associated with organized religion. Many soldiers found solace in philosophical reflections, in their belief in justice, in their conviction that they were fighting for a just cause. Any belief system that gave meaning to what was happening became a source of psychological strength. We have looked at 10 ways that helped World War II soldiers cope with fear and remain combat-ready in inhuman conditions. These methods, from simple breathing techniques to complex psychological rituals, demonstrate the amazing ability of the human psyche to adapt to extreme situations. It is important to understand that fear in war was not a sign of weakness, but a natural reaction of a healthy person. Those who learned to manage this fear not only increased their chances of survival, but also helped their comrades maintain their mental health. These methods were the result of collective wisdom passed down from veterans to recruits. Many of the techniques described remain relevant today. Modern psychology confirms the effectiveness of breathing exercises, visualization, physical activity, and social support in combating stress. Soldiers in that war intuitively discovered methods that science only substantiated decades later. Which of these methods of coping with fear did you find most effective? Perhaps the mental rehearsal technique or the buddy system? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes about the unknown pages of military history.